Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Roundtable in Knotch and MikMak's Roundtable series. So I'm Ryan Sloan, the Content Communications Manager here at Knotch. And I'd just like to thank all of you guys for joining us today, past attendees and even those tuning in for the first time, and welcome you to today's Roundtable on navigating COVID-19. So before we begin, I just wanted to make a note that this roundtable is gathering us together for more of an open and honest conversation where we can all learn from each other and grow together. And also during this discussion, feel free to write down some questions that you have for either Rachel or Anda or any of the panelists. Zoom has a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen that you can just submit questions there. So make sure to do that if you have anything on your mind. And now I'd like to introduce our hosts, Anda Gansca and Rachel Tipograph. They're going to lead us today through this discussion with brands like Intuit, H&R Block, BlackRock, Unilever, the Hershey Company, and more. So our first host is Anda Gansca, who is the co-founder and CEO of Knotch, a content intelligence platform enabling companies like Amazon, Facebook, Walmart, Bank of America, Salesforce, and others to plan for breakthrough content as well as measure and optimize it across channels. She's a regular thought leadership contributor to the trade media industry at large, and she's been named to both Forbes and Inc.'s annual 30 Under 30 lists, Adweek's Young Influential list, Campaign's Female Frontiers list, and Adweek's Top 100 Creatives, just to name a few. And we also have with us today Rachel Tipograph. She is the founder and CEO of MikMak, an enterprise marketing e-commerce platform that's helping brands better understand consumers by connecting digital investments to online retailer insights. She's been recognized as a leading innovator across the globe, including Forbes 30 Under 30 Who Are Changing the World, Marie Claire's 50 Most Influential Women in America, and Fast Company's Most Creative People in Business. So, all right, Anda and Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ryan. Anda, it's another Thursday.
I know. It feels like I actually get so much energy just from knowing that we're going to be doing this. It's like my peak of the week. And Monday is like I'm waiting for Thursday. So excited to be back with you.
Yeah, I think we're just looking for routines any way that we can find them right now. It gives us sanity, and I'm so happy to be back with you. I think this is
like routine and some level of, I guess, partnership, just feeling less lonely because we're all so isolated. And I think if nothing else, this forum allows us to come together and just feel like less insane and less lonely. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the most affordable form of therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think this is week 6 or 7. I don't even know how to figure that out.
I even forgot like how many days we've been in this. Like sometimes I forget what day it is. It's a bit fluid at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it seems like this week's theme is appropriate given where we are, which is all about boosting morale, not just from a consumer standpoint, but for us as leaders. Like what I keep saying to my team and, all my friends and my family is that I'm prioritizing my mental health above everything else. Because if I can't show up and try to be my best self, nothing is going to work out and work. So I'm excited to hear from everyone, to hear how they're boosting morale on an individual level, a team level, a corporate level. I think it's the appropriate time in this COVID journey for us to be talking about this. And, just to share some recent anecdotes about what's happening in terms of morale at MikMak. I mean, Anda, you know me really well. Like, I have to shake things up or I get disinterested. And so for the first few weeks of COVID, I was doing this thing where I would randomly call MikMakers and just check in with them. And then after doing that for a few weeks, I've realized that my entire calendar was just checking in with people, and that wasn't an efficient use of my time. So this week I tried a new format, which I'm really enjoying, which is I'm doing lunches and drinks with like 5 to 7 MikMakers at a time, all from different departments. And I think it's been great for me and for the people who've participated so far. And then the other thing is, I don't know when you do reviews, but it's review season for us. So we're doing like Q1 reviews now. And we asked a new question in the review, which is, what is your superpower? And we're now going to be creating like a really cool graphic presentation and showcasing to the entire company what everyone's superpower is. So my big thing is trying to figure out every which way we can right now to celebrate people in the micro and the macro moments. What in the world are you doing other than looking fabulous to boost morale?
It's just red lipstick, and I only do it once a week. So, first of all, it's kind of ironic that we're doing this really awesome roundtable every week talking about how do we navigate COVID, because I feel like for the first time, I'm genuinely feeling fatigue talking about COVID. And so I actually think it's an interesting kind of meta situation. How do we think about navigating COVID without now talking about COVID? And I actually see that coming up in some of the content that we're seeing come out of some of these really large enterprises and brands. More and more our customers are telling us we kind of just want to go back to talking about other stuff, or maybe talking about how to navigate this time without mentioning COVID. I think a few weeks ago, everyone was just navigating towards it. Probably the mentions of that word were kind of through the roof. And now it's really just, how do we step away from it? And I think it's happening because we don't know, it's like a crisis without a real end. And because of that, I don't think we want to keep talking about it until we know that we can pinpoint how we get out of it. So in terms of how we're navigating this as a team, a couple of things. First, a while back, we created a mental health benefit. And so everyone at Knotch actually gets a stipend to just use towards whatever they want for their mental health. The program is called Ocean, but then we also do Ocean lunches. And so we just kind of organize every couple of weeks a Zoom where we eat together and we just talk about the anxiety of navigating this, the uncertainty, the grief for those of us who on the team who have lost someone they love. And then separately, I've really been ramping up the usage of a product called 15.5. I mean, there's different products out there, but it enables me to track the priorities. I think what happens a lot during a crisis, especially if what you do as a company becomes more relevant, is it kind of just feels like someone's dropped a grenade and everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And it's easy to confuse activity with progress. So what I'm trying to do is constantly bring the leadership team back to their priorities. So I'm tracking all of our priorities in there. But this really cool and simple feature that I love is that it asks you how you feel every week. And so I'm tracking how everyone in the company feels and how that's moving week on week. And it's been really helpful to know what teams are really struggling that I need to kind of jump into and make a bunch of calls and just make sure that we're there for them. So those are just a couple of things that we're doing.
I love that. That should be a Salesforce plugin. And then you can marry that with client health.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, listen, I think no one wants to hear from us really, and everyone wants to hear from all these leaders. So I'm excited to start it off. Before we begin, some ground rules for the new people. We have around 10 esteemed guests. We are going to spend 10 minutes picking their brain. There's a Q&A function. Ask whatever you want. Throughout every conversation, we're going to pull a question for whether it's that individual speaker or maybe it's the group of esteemed guests that we have. And, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be doing this every Thursday. The amazing Knotch events team that blows my mind will send out our next great speaking event, which will happen next Thursday. And we'll take it from here. So who is our first guest?
Thank you, Rachel. So our first guest is the amazing Lara. One of my favorite things about Lara is that she's a big fan of the Pros and Content podcast by Knotch. In fact, she sent me this note one day where she said, I've listened to this podcast 4 times and I really want to talk to you. And I literally screenshotted it and I sent it to every board member. And I was like, see, content works. So Lara, thank you so much for being a fan of our podcast and welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. And yes, I am a fan of your podcast.
Thank you. So Lara, I'll introduce you briefly, but please feel free to add any other kind of context to your background. You are the Chief Marketing Officer as well as the General Manager of Strategic Partnerships at Intuit. And before Intuit, you were at Amazon, Visa, Gap, Nike, and General Mills. So you have a really diverse background and you bring a lot of experience to the table. In our prep conversation, you also shared with me that you're not only running marketing, but also comms. And that one of the really big initiatives for you since you joined Intuit was to figure out how to unite those functions and really bring them together so that they act in unison. Tell us a little bit about how that has worked since the crisis began. I'm really curious if that's paid off and if you feel like you did everything you could before the crisis to be in a good place on that front, on that union.
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things that I said coming into Intuit, and I just so folks know too, Intuit, we have TurboTax, Mint, and QuickBooks. So we have quite an array of customer sets from consumers to self-employed to small business and middle market business owners. But one of the key things was, you know, I have always been an advocate of paid, owned, and earned media being choreographed and working together. And part of the reason for that is, you know, I really believe that a consumer doesn't discern between those. They don't categorize those buckets. And so we as marketers and communicators shouldn't. And so coming in, that was one of the things I really wanted to happen within the organization. And, you know, the teams definitely have made huge strides in that, and we're always very open-minded and understood the impact. It has absolutely paid off in spades as we've moved to deal with COVID. And, you know, without a doubt, you know, we have stand-ups, as you might imagine, as we've pivoted to address, you know, we've got the whole CARES Act, which put, you know, billions of dollars in the marketplace that we needed to ensure that our consumers and small businesses would have access to. And when you're meeting on that stuff, like we have been daily, you got to have both marketers and comms folks at the table. And, you know, they're really finishing each other's sentences now. And the work has been incredibly impactful because of having them both working hand in glove together.
We talked a little bit about the fact that you typically see a bit of a tension between the marketing and the comms team. And I was actually a part of a conversation earlier this week with a lot of comms folks, and they were saying, you know, it's kind of our time. Like a lot of our companies have moved some marketing dollars into comms finally. How are you dealing with that? I mean, do you really see no more friction because you've brought everyone together?
You know, I think there really is a admiration and respect there for the fact that they're different crafts, yet complementary crafts. And so clearly there's times where there might be different points of view on, hey, here's where earned should lead, and then perhaps where paid should follow, or vice versa. And we may debate that as a team, but generally we usually come to a really strong agreement collectively, knowing, so in the case of COVID, as we had two principles as an example. One was to work to get money in the pockets of our consumers and small businesses as soon as we could. And two was to just frankly offer relief. On the relief side, we made donations as a company that were quite significant in nature, and then also launched a GoFundMe campaign to support small businesses. And then on the putting money in people's pockets, we had a raft of really tech build-outs that we did, from offering access to the PPP loans that a small business would get, to being able to register for stimulus package, stimulus relief through our TurboTax product. And, you know, that was, hey, there are times where you got to get that out yesterday, and that's earned media all day long. And you're putting a press release out and then doing interviews. And then there's, I don't know if everybody's getting this information, and we actually should potentially put some paid underneath that. And, you know, I'll just give you one example. So we did a lot of earn to support both of those efforts, but then additionally, both our TurboTax and our QuickBooks teams pivoted and changed television ads within 2 days to address standing up on the QuickBooks side, you know, a spot that would allow people to know that we had a site with resources. And then on the TurboTax side, that we actually have support live with a CPA. So it's called TurboTax Live, that you can get help virtually with a CPA, and that we needed to get that message out because everybody's at home now. And so that is an amalgamation of paid, owned, and earned working together, and that all needed to be choreographed. And so, I would tension, no, I think, sometimes different points of view, but that only breeds better outcomes. And so, only goodness, and, the number of impressions, and Anda, you and I have been talking about content and that being so important in the time of COVID is, people are hungry for information that's valuable, this value add content. And so, I see both marketing and comms having a seat at the table in that.
What's really refreshing to hear is that it doesn't sound like you've completely bowed out of paid. And some of the perspectives that we've heard over the last few weeks is this is not the time to invest marketing dollars either because we're trying to save jobs or because we're we don't believe that this is the time to be transactional. And I 100% agree with that. But at the same time, there's still a desire for consumers to hear from the brands that, especially at a time like this, could give them products they really care about. So I'm happy to hear that you're investing across the board. Laura, I'm curious, we talked a bit about this as well. There's still areas of resistance that you face, and there's still areas of friction that you face. And so one, I'm curious to hear, what do you do when that happens, and how has kind of the different experiences in your career informed that? And I would also assume that during a crisis, everything gets accelerated. The friction gets accelerated because the work has to get accelerated. So how do you manage your team to deliver, to stay positive, and to be efficient?
Okay, well, there's a lot of questions in that question. No, it's all relevant, right? And I'm going to quote your podcast, but one of the things that one of your podcastees said, Kristen Lemkow, when she was on, had said that she had a discussion with Jeff Jones, who is the CEO of H&R Block. I actually worked with him in a past life when I was at Gap, but the point there was, when you hit resistance, teach. And I think that was what Jeff had told Kristen. And, knowing Jeff from a past life, I could definitely hear him saying that. And I do think it's an interesting idea that when there's a lot of question marks and frankly, not everybody knows the answers, when you do have knowledge to share and learnings from a long career or past experiences, these are chances to educate. I will say, though, that there are times where we don't have a playbook on this. Like, a global pandemic is not something that comes across your desk every day, thank goodness. But, it is a bit of our new normal. And so I would say, the awesome thing when you haven't had a playbook like this is when you have teams that you've cultivated, that they themselves are so open and transparent, and you can together scrimmage and come up with ideas collectively. And so, when you have that diversity of skill set at the table, comms, marketing, we have a brand experience storytelling group that we also tap into, we have all kinds of folks at the table that scrimmage these ideas, you come out with better outcomes. And so I'd like to tell you there's a silver bullet, but for me, it's bringing diversity to the table and scrimmaging, and that's how you breed solutions and, again, better outcomes.
I love that. I have a question from the audience for you. How are you looking to work with publications and partners to get your marketing and comms message out? Are there specific criteria that you consider when choosing your partners?
This is a great question, because in the space we operate in, which is more critical than ever, our mission is to power prosperity around the world. And we really believe that everybody has the opportunity to prosper, no matter their background. And we have financial products that support their needs. You've got a lot of partners who want to tap in, and, we absolutely want to look at all of them, but you also have to prioritize and you have to focus. And so we're really looking at, where can we have impact in supporting our customers? And it goes back to, getting money in their pockets and supporting them from a relief perspective. And so customers first, followed by those two principles, that's how the partners that we are working with really make the cut.
The final question that I have for you, we talked briefly about how excited you were that Intuit had a kind of a portfolio of products that was mainly digital, and how this is really only driving even more of a need for those products. I would love to hear from you. What are the things you're currently measuring for success within those products that maybe you weren't measuring for before the crisis?
Yeah, you know, we're really seeing three secular shifts, right? One is this move to virtual. Two is this idea that money, it matters. When you have a team that works for you and a small business owner and they need to be paid salary, you know, having money is helpful in that. And then, and ultimately, you know, it's in this world where things are happening virtually, that then goes to the next principle, which is online engagement is a new norm. And, you know, yes, these things were important before, but they are more important than ever. And so, you know, I would say our fundamental, you know, true north goals, which are absolutely baked into how customers view us, they remain because they're really about making sure our customers are happy. But what we want to make sure is that you know, sentiment of we are a brand that matters and that our mission comes through is absolutely more important than ever. Because, you know, if we're true to the mission, which we deeply believe, we know that we're gonna have a great, you know, part of their lives, you know, be a great part of their lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lara. Really appreciate all the input. If you can stay on, please do, because we're gonna have a few more questions from the audience soon.
Great.
Meanwhile, I'm going to throw it over to Rachel.
Yeah, so hey, everyone on the line, we're going to do one of our classic polls. If we can pull up the poll. So if you can give us an answer, how have your own online content consumption habits changed since you began spending more time at home due to COVID? Decreased, increased, let us know. We'll share the results later. For those of you who know, we power a lot of the commerce in Pinterest. And I can tell you, man, are people spending time finding unusual ways to consume content and do inventive activities.
I was actually kind of torn on it because I was thinking to myself, I stopped watching the news a few weeks ago. So I don't know if that counts as a decrease in content consumption, but I am watching more puppy videos than ever before, so.
Yeah, well, Anda, I think you saw, I'm now teaching myself guitar thanks to YouTube.
Oh, you are?
Yep.
Wow.
Last night I learned how to play Lean On Me. You can learn anything on YouTube. It's amazing.
That's
all right,
great.
poll can go away. And who is next? Let's see.
So next up, we have Stacy from Genpact. Welcome, Stacy.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. So Stacy, you are the SVP and Chief Marketing Officer of Genpact, and I'd love for you to maybe kick it off by telling us a little bit about what Genpact does. And also yesterday when we were talking, you were so passionate about some of the work that you've been doing just in terms of predictive intelligence and the impact that it has. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then I'll jump into the rest of my questions.
Great, sure. Happy to give you that background. So Genpact is a professional services company. We're a digital transformation company, and we help with, complex end-to-end processes. So think about all sorts of messy things, your supply chain, your finance and accounting, your operations. So all of these very complex things that need lots of digital interventions and lots of expertise to figure out how to make businesses run more effectively, more efficiently, and to actually get better outcomes. So that's what Genpact does. And as you were saying, Anda, at this point in time, with all of the things, and Lara, you were speaking about it as well, there are so many critical things that needs to happen now so that society as we know it, this altered version of society, continues to function. And so one of the things that we've been doing a lot of is actually celebrating the moments where our people are making a massive difference in the lives of individuals. So the predictive analytics that you were talking about, so, we've been using predictive analytics to help, medical device companies predict hotspots to get the right devices into the right places at the right times. And so we're getting emails and things from clients saying, congratulations, your work, the one movement you made, that prediction you made, saved 10 people this weekend. What is more rewarding than that you come in on a Monday and you're like, my work saved 10 people this weekend. And so I think in all of this, craziness, that ability to celebrate what people are doing that's making a difference, I think has actually been incredibly rewarding for our people, and has also renewed the sense of purpose for why we get up every day and do what we do anyway.
So I wanted you to share that because I think it's indicative of one of the many stories that I think a lot of companies are finding right now. And as a CMO, I'm curious, when you hear a story like that, like what's your first thought? I mean, beyond just like, oh yay, I work for a company that's having an impact. I'm assuming your brain immediately goes to, how can we tell that story? Where do we say it? What channels, etc. So how have you thought about harnessing some of those stories? And then as a kind of context to that, I'm just curious, what are the areas where you've decided to really lean in from an investment standpoint as a marketer versus lean out?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think that, when you look at where we've all been over the last 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 weeks, however long people's journeys have been, right? So for us, as soon as this was evident in China, we knew that we had to prepare for how we were able to deliver work globally immediately. So for us, this started in January, as soon as China realized what, the situation that we were all in. So we've been in this now for what feels like an eternity. And where the beginning of this was about, Lara, as you were talking about, the comms and the crisis elements of actually making sure that we were responding in the right way. We've got 100,000 people around the world, making sure that they were safe and that we were able to deliver the work that we do. As we've gotten deeper into this, and all of those things are now fundamentally, established, right? People are working from home. People are able to deliver the work. What we've seen now is that we've pivoted into the next stage of this collective conversation. So to the point you're making, all of these good stories that were coming out, we immediately said, how do we harness them? And how do we harness them across all the things that we do? So back to what Lara was saying about the marketing and communications being hand in hand, they also, both marketing and communications are one integrated under me. That ability to quickly find those stories, not only use those stories internally so that our people could see the work that we were all doing and feel good about that. Externally, how do we get those stories out? Certainly social media, but even, reporters, right? They've been looking for other stories to tell. So how do you make sure you're telling those? So that was the basics of where it started from a comms perspective. But then we looked at this and we said, we're actually sitting on a gold mine of stories. So how do we mine that across everything we do? So you look at our thought leadership people. We said, okay, look at these trends that we're seeing. We're seeing big trends in predictive analytics. We're seeing trends in a bunch of areas. How do you turn that into the next round, mine those stories for the next round of thought leadership, the next trends that we're going to put out? We pulled in all of our client referenceability and our client success teams and saying, now we've got a treasure trove of brand new stories. How do we go into that treasure trove and actually start to prioritize what are those next case studies? What are those next references that are coming out? So for us, it was really about looking at what we were getting and saying, how do we use that across every single part of our function? Because frankly, it's creating a lot of really exciting and inspirational content. And then to answer,
Cece,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go.
I was going to answer the second part of your question about where we're focusing, but go ahead, answer yours. I'm sure I can get to that one.
I was going to say, we see so much content across the realm of content, and we've been able to kind of notice that it all started with obviously, as we all know, I think we've all seen that YouTube video in these troubled times, in these unprecedented times, etc. And then it was like, okay, here's the donation that we're making, and here's how we're helping everyone. Then it went to more utility content, like how do I survive this financially? How do I survive this technologically? How do I survive this mentally, etc. And it sounds like now it's becoming more and more about inspiration and hope, and just surfacing some of these stories. Have you seen a transition in the themes? How fast are you seeing that cycle go through? And what do you think is next in terms of storytelling?
Yeah, so I think, so you've hit on a lot of important things there. I think cycle time is key here, right? So cycle times are now so dramatically condensed because the world is changing so quickly around us. So what used to be weeks and months, we now actually look at in hours and days. So I do think it's the things that applied 2 weeks ago almost seem, oh, cute. Oh, that's cute that was relevant 2 weeks ago. It's like we feel like we're in a completely different world every 2 weeks. So I do think for us, first of all, we have relied very heavily on our data, right? Because, and that's not just looking at, oh, what does last month's data show us so that we can, adjust our spend, adjust our campaigns for next month. It's now week to week. How is what people are choosing to consume, how is that changing? And so I think on the things you pointed out as the recent trends and the shifts, I think is absolutely accurate. The thing that we're seeing now, in addition to wanting those stories, wanting those inspirational stories, we're also seeing the shift to what's next. So now it is, what is the new normal? What am I going to expect? And it's not just the short term, what does returning to work look like? It's that longer term, right? So what are the things that maybe we're in the B2B space. So the types of projects and things that might have been less important now, but that in the new normal, we're going to see come up, come up with much more focus. So that new normal for us is the next place everyone is going. And frankly, when we look at the content that we're preparing and that we launch new content every day, it is really about helping our clients navigate that new normal environment that's not there yet, but you have to be planning for it now.
When we were talking yesterday, you were saying how happy you are that you're not in Manhattan right now. So I think the new normal for a lot of Manhattanites is that they're going to live in the countryside or in Boston, like you.
I know it's funny because this is what we were saying. So I was in New York for almost 15 years, and I've been in Boston now for over 5. And my husband and I were sort of taking a walk with our kids, not running into any other human beings. We can actually do this in the suburbs. You can take a walk and not see people. And I said, this is the first time truly since we have left Manhattan that I actually feel grateful I don't live in Manhattan. I've never been able to say that one day in my life other than COVID. So there you go.
I really hope New York can come back to its greatness, because I miss being stuck to other people on the subway. I can't wait to get back to that. So I wanted to ask you, Stacey, you mentioned yesterday something about focusing on the things that are in your control versus out of your control. And it resonated with me because I think that's one of the main things I struggle with from a mental perspective. As an entrepreneur, I think we all have kind of big egos and we assume that we can control a lot more than we can. And during a crisis like this, it's really mind-boggling. And so focusing on the things that I can actually influence versus not has been, like, I just have to constantly remind myself of that. You were talking about it in the context of your team and helping your team navigate through this. What else are you saying to them? What sort of processes and habits and rituals have you invented in the last few weeks?
Yeah, so I think that, I think honesty and transparency are and very frequent communication, I think, are the hallmarks, at least for me and for our teams, of this time, right? We don't have all the answers, but we can be honest about what it is we see. And I think, Anda, you and I talked about this yesterday. The reality is, many of us, in addition to being professionals, are, we have spouses, could have children at home that we're now figuring out, how to help them learn. Like, I didn't know I was also going to be doing homeschooling, right? And so in some of us have, parents we're taking care of. We all have different situations. So being very honest about that. So I have, my husband and I sort of now split up which calls, which virtual classes that of my 8-year-old, my 3rd grader, which classes we're going to cover. And so when I have to get off a call for my 11 a.m. social studies, that I cover social studies at 11 a.m. So I literally, as I'm getting off the call, I say, I have to go, I have a hard stop. I have 3rd grade social studies right now. Just even giving that permission that says we're all just doing the best we can. So if you've got to stop doing your very important work to go do 3rd grade social studies, that's what you got to do. You got to go do it. So I think there's that level of honesty and transparency, really frequently communicating. So I do all hands town halls every week, and we literally say, as long as these are helpful, we'll do them every single week. And every week everyone says, yes, they're helpful, let's keep doing them. And this is where the shift to what we can control becomes important. So one of the things we do on those calls is we actually talk about the marketing pivot. We can control the marketing pivot, right? We can control what choices we make, on what content we're going to focus on what campaigns we're going to pivot to. So we might not know where all this is going to land, but we do know the fundamentals of we're going to focus on our data. We're going to focus on the priorities of making sure that we're helping our clients focus on the things they need to do right this second to get to tomorrow, to get to the other side of this issue. And so I think there's a little bit of power in being able to bring really cool ideas and fun things that we're seeing where the team is experimenting with new marketing activations. And so we can control that. We know how to just do our best marketing in any scenario. So I think that also gives people the ability to work on the stuff they can work on and get less fussed about the things that frankly are not going to be in our control.
Well, Stacey, thank you so much for that. Every time I interact with you, I get so much energy. I love like the energy and the positivity you bring. So I can tell that your team probably does not struggle with any fatigue because you bring that energy to the table every meeting. Thank you. Appreciate it. I wanted to move on to our next speaker, and then after that, we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience for everyone. So I wanted to move on to welcome Vinu. Welcome, welcome. Dialing in from Kansas City.
Hi, Anda. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So, Vinu, you're the Chief Marketing Officer of H&R Block. I'm looking through your bio. You have over 2 decades of marketing and digital experience. You were at TD Bank before as the CMO and head of corporate and public affairs. And before that, you were at Ally Financial, who's one of my favorite customers. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen this crisis evolve from the standpoint of H&R Block, but also with the financial hat on from your previous roles.
I mean, it's revealing something that I think we all are recognizing just by, looking around our neighborhoods and talking to our friends, which is that, we are in a scenario where most Americans are $400 away from real challenges. And when things like this happen, it sort of reveals that. And then the real burden is on what do we do together to not only deal with it now, but think about how we deal with it on a more systemic basis looking ahead. And that's just the reality of where we are. But it's, to me, I look at it and I think about, it's almost a gift in a sense. It's allowing us to really think about what we're about, why we're here and what we're trying to do. And this moment, now it's been about a month, I guess, for most of us being at home and engaging in this way. For me, it's given a lot of time, even just in between meetings, because I'm alone, other than my wife being in another room, to reflect and have that few minutes where I'm not just running from a meeting to another meeting. And I think that's been really wonderful and a real chance to lean into this idea that what can we do, not only as a company, but as an individual to be helpful in that.
It's a really interesting comment around taking this time to reset. I've heard this from a lot of people, just asking ourselves much more fundamental questions that we didn't have time for to kind of ask before. Have you been doing that from a brand standpoint?
Yeah, we always had a view, a very clear view of what we were about and why we were about. And just to say to other chief marketers who will certainly understand it, is to help and inspire confidence to clients and communities everywhere. which has real resonance and real value. We have 80,000 tax professionals, and these tax professionals are in every main street around the country in 10,000 offices. This is a large operation, 21 million clients. And so we are very much a part of the fabric of all of the communities that we serve in, because the tax pro tends to be a little bit like the doctor. You tell them a lot of things that you wouldn't otherwise tell people, and they engage with you in something that's really, really material to you, because you might walk out of that tax moment with a refund of, say, $2,000. And that's a big amount of money to get on one day. And so it really becomes a very, very emotional, real relationship that people hold on to for years. And so we know that our tax pros value that so much that they will take the side of the client over the side of the corporation any day and twice on Sunday. And that's fine by us, right? So how do we sort of harness that reality into something that's more tangible for not just our employees at the individual level, but also as a company? And so we've always thought about that. And we've always said that's what we want to do. But if you look at it practically, how we've thought about it in this last month and a half, it just makes every little decision more crystallized. And we sort of reflect back on what would our brand and purpose tell us to do, and then really try and take that lens into answering the questions that we do. We went to a digital drop-off model, a primarily drop-off model, pretty early in this crisis. And it's because we are really managing between not only the health of our clients, the health of our tax pros, the health of our business. And so all those things come to play, and it's the lenses that we work with that help us make those decisions quickly and effectively. And it's made me really proud to be here.
I'm curious because you talk about this emotional connection, and so much of that is formed because of this face-to-face interaction. I've been asking myself, what is the future of enterprise sales in a world where you can't really meet people face-to-face? But I'm assuming you must be asking yourselves the same question, back to the point that Lara was making around kind of online engagement and digital products. How are you now thinking about the evolution of your product, which is a hybrid of this face-to-face interaction as well as the digital side of what you do?
Yeah, so half our clients use our digital-only product already. So they essentially go through our online platform and complete their taxes. But more than half of our clients don't. And for them, that relationship with a human being or an engagement with a human being is super important. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think it's going to, having a tax pro do your taxes is a really, really nice thing to get done. And the art is, how do we do that in a way that is useful for consumers in an environment where they don't necessarily need to or want to be sitting right in front of you. Today I'm talking to you, Anda, and you're somewhere in northern New York.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't make our engagement any less significant or meaningful. In fact, we probably can get more engagements done today because I don't have to actually travel to you, or you don't have to travel to me. So there are ways of making this valuable, and we're leaning into that. We always were, but this is obviously going to accelerate how not only our clients get comfortable with it, our tax pros get more comfortable with it. And so it just allows us to move at a faster pace in terms of making those changes.
And as a marketing team, what were the areas that you decided to lean into as soon as this happened? Or was there kind of a step back, let's kind of keep the powder dry for a later date when we know it's going to work a lot better?
Well, when it first started, we did the things that you would expect, right? So we edited our TV spot. We changed the way that the narrative was on digital. We changed how the site presented itself. So those things happened because we were clearly more interested in service and less interested in messages that sounded too selly or salesman-y, I guess. But the thing that I'm most proud of when I look back at that moment, and even now, in terms of what was the biggest pivot we made, and I'll equate it back to, I started my career at FedEx, the shipping company. And back in those days, Thanksgiving and Christmas were just really, really tough for FedEx because everyone wanted to ship stuff. And at midnight, these packages would be sorted and loaded onto the planes, and then they would fly out at 2 a.m. So the planes would come in at midnight, they'd get sorted, loaded, and then go out at 2 a.m. And we always had a really tough time getting those packages done in that time period. And every year, we would essentially close up the marketing activities and say, during Thanksgiving and Christmas, the most important thing you can do is go load packages. So I'd put on my steel-toed shoes and head off there and, you know, be loading packages onto the truck, onto the plane, because that was the most important thing we could do for the company. And that kind of an ethos is something that I really valued. And so when I look at what we did over here, the biggest thing that happened was that consumers and our clients said, we need to know more. We don't understand what's going on. We don't know what the stimulus thing is. We're worried about whether we can still get our refund in time. This is a big moment for us. We're scared, and we don't know how to untangle all this information about these different acts that are being presented. We don't know who to trust. And so what became a group of people that would historically be doing marketing campaigns really evolved into a group of people, designers, writers, DevOps folks, .com folks, that were basically spending their time understanding the facts and then translating that into consumable information for our clients on our site in ways that they could use it. And so that's what made me really proud. You know, we got our stimulus calculator up first faster than anybody. So we were ahead of CNBC in showing that. Those are the kinds of things that I was super proud of, because it said, you know what, if we just focus on what is needed and not worry about our specialty, we will actually add more value to not only what we contributed, but also what the company needs. And so those are the things that we did.
I actually wrote down what's the most important thing you could do. I really like that. I think especially in a time of crisis, it's a really good one to galvanize the team around. Thank you for that, Vinu. Rachel, I want to pass it over to you. I know you have a couple of questions and maybe the poll results.
Yeah. Why don't we start with the poll results? So, all right, we've 2x'd our content consumption. I'm not surprised. The 7% that have decreased, what are you doing with your life? Thank you all.
They're learning how to play the guitar, just like
they're with me. So I would love to pick everyone's brain who's on the call. So if you want to unmute yourself. So I'm going to take some questions from the Q&A and I'm going to read it verbatim. So first one, in the current context, is sales revenue still the primary determinant of positive marketing activity? If so, how do you rely on that measure without seeming like ambulance chasing? And if not, what is the more valid metric right now? So what is the new ROI in marketing during the time of COVID? Who wants to be the first esteemed guest to answer this?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. This is Robin Matlock, and I'm from VMware. Our business is a B2B enterprise business, so you got to put that in context. But for us, quality of engagement. And I measure marketing engagement by, you know, are they digesting content? It's usually content of some kind. But I think it's really important right now. Customers, even those that aren't maybe in the heart of solving COVID-related problems for their business, we sell to IT technologists, so they're doing a lot of research, they're gathering information, they're getting smarter about things, certified. So I'm really tracking, you know, what is that content consumption and how are they engaging? And for my sellers, that's important insight.
Got it.
So I can jump in, or did you want to go back, Rachel?
No, please.
Okay, I'm Barb Goose, and I'm the CMO at John Hancock. For us, while sales are still important, honestly, we had to figure out a way to continue to have sales. So in parallel to that, to us, the biggest metric that became important was tracking customer sentiment and NPS, because how is the experience for customers? How, you know, were things, and perhaps where some things are changing, what was the feedback customers were giving us? What were the daily verbatims? And we started looking at that every single day to kind of tell what was going on. And it was interesting because we've been able to track an overall sentiment going from just fear and, you know, what the unknown and people being super, super scared. And now people have just lost patience. And so it helps us actually think about the experiences. And as we want to ensure that we continue to deliver sales, knowing that just consumers have no patience, that they're, you know, in this strange environment, they don't know how long it's going to last. There's still a lot of unknowns, but helping to make things simple making easier decisions, like helping to make their lives better. That's really what's guiding us, a lot of that customer sentiment.
So I have a question about that. You know, there's so many things that we can't control right now in terms of like, you know, consumer mindset. So how do you figure out the effectiveness of your marketing versus the already mindset of a consumer that might be out of your control?
So it's clearly a balance. There's a number of problems we can't fix, but today in a verbatim, a customer said, you know, how am I supposed to go to a notary? And, you know, we do have a process for this, but maybe it wasn't as clear or as known for everybody. So for some of the things, we actually have fixes, and it's just a matter of putting them more front and center. And in other cases, there are things that we can do to, you know, to make things a little bit easier. We're in the life insurance business. We didn't have fully digital claims. And so obviously it would be so weird to think to send a check and you can't even get into your bank. Some banks are by appointment. So, you know, that moved to the top of the list for us to fully implement because we knew that was, you know, it became an imperative for the business, but, you know, super important for customers.
Yeah. Take one more question from the audience for the whole group. If people are looking for inspiration, are there specific channels where you feel that message lands better than others? Channel insights from anyone?
I think you guys, it's context matters. I mean, depending on the content, you want to have it, you know, where it is most relevant. So, you know, as we think about, you know, we had all these discussions with the government on making sure we were helping to get funds in our customers' pockets. And, you know, part of that strategy was, you know, how do you end up in the USA Today's and some of the publications where just that general broad reach audience is needing, where is consuming, and it's relevant in their day. And, you know, often we think about, hey, we need to be on Squawk Box or, you know, Kramer. And, you know, at the end of the day, when you're helping customers get by day to day, hour to hour, you want to be where they're going. And so context matters. And so it really depends. So Rachel, you were talking about Pinterest. There's great content to be consumed there. And sometimes it's discoverable and it's delicious and nutritious, as Andrea Millard would tell you at Pinterest, you know. So I just think, you know, that's where you have to kind of take your marketer hat off and really think about human behavior, and that people want to be where they want to be. And then you need to meet them there.
Yeah, 100%. All right, I think we're gonna move the show on the road to get to everyone. Thank you guys for chiming in. So next up, in from Hershey, Pennsylvania, Doug, you here?
I'm here.
Awesome. So everyone, this is Doug Stratton, the Chief Digital Officer at the Hershey Company. Well, I can only imagine what your life has been like the last 7 weeks based on the data that I'm seeing from the other side. You know, as an industry, where we thought online grocery would be in the year 2025, we arrived there essentially on March 15th.
Yes. It's basically 2 years of growth in about 2 months.
Absolutely wild.
So, yeah, I think it is absolutely wild. I think there's a couple things from my perspective that it actually leads into the question that was just asked in terms of, you know, where you're getting inspiration. And I think the interesting thing about, you know, our company and the category that we participate in is that it's so centered on, you know, family occasion, sharing, a little bit of goodness for yourself, those types of things. And all those things are super important right now. So there's an element of both the fact that we're now living in the world of contactless transaction writ large, not just contactless, you know, credit card transactions, but just contactless, period. And, that's making a big difference in terms of the way people are behaving and shopping, obviously. And so that's a boon in one sense. And then also to be in a category that is, and with some brands that are, really loved and kind of comfort people at times like this, it's been really, really interesting. But I won't lie, very, very intense, very intense.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's funny what you say about nostalgia and brands that people love. This is the whole theory why everyone's making bread right now, is that we're trying to get back to simple times. You have so many brands within the Hershey company portfolio. Are you seeing consumers over-index right now in some of your oldest brands?
Well, I would say more broadly, what you'd say, they're over-indexing on the things that you would imagine would bring comfort. So if you actually look at the food categories overall, there's a couple different food categories that are doing really, really well. Ice cream, for example. Again, kind of treats for yourself, treats for your family, things that can be shared amongst the family are trending really well. And chocolate just happens to be at the top of that list. So that naturally benefits Hershey brands, and we are seeing that in the data. And to the previous comment around inspiration, a lot of the we do analytics on our properties. A lot of what we see, of course, is focused around recipe, and as you can imagine, with more people staying home and trying to design ways to make their family feel more comfortable or to occupy their time, those things become more important. And so ensuring that we adjust our messaging and the access to that type of content is super important.
So with the growth of e-com and probably the heightened importance of your team right now within the organization, has your day-to-day role changed over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I would say it has. So I would say the elements of the role that were more focused on, I'd say, enterprise transformation around broader digital strategy, and even I would say some of the longer term kind of capability building has really taken, an intellectual and activity-based backseat to the needs of the business. And so from that standpoint, I would say, much more balanced and involved in the day-to-day on the digital commerce end of things, for obvious reasons. And it's one of those things, it's not, when you look at what's happening, it's not just, it's not like we're seeing, like a bump in growth in one area here or over here. And you're like, maybe that's maybe that's a white space that I can go explore and exploit. This is a wholesale fundamental transformation. And so it's literally taking everything that you've been, planning for and modeling for and whatnot for, in some cases, years, and thinking that they were still maybe a year or 2 or 3 out, and saying, okay, how can I do this type of stuff, this type of work in a condensed time frame, still keep the quality of the work up, and make sure that we're not spending too much, balancing with the needs of the broader business. So that's I would say that in a nutshell, that's the difference in the role and then the difference in the focus.
How are you reorganizing your team right now around what's important? Like maybe there were a bunch of people who were working on things that you've had to press pause. Did you have to upskill them in new ways?
No, I would say we have a really flexible team that we really look at the way it's organized, I would say about every 6 months, and, make micro adjustments anyway, based on what we think is most important in the business. The team is already really adept with agile, working, as we had adopted that a couple of years ago. So none of the tools that we're using now were even remotely foreign to anybody on my team. We had good ways of working and organization around that. Not perfect because it's an imperfect process, but in general, comfort with it that some folks might not have. I would say the biggest thing is going back a couple of years when I started with the Hershey company, we specifically called out that the activities that the team would be focusing on were absolutely fundamental in ensuring that Hershey can survive another 125 years. And, I do that as a way to kind of like open people's eyes and shock people a little bit. But at the same time, I truly believe that if we do it right, we in some way, shape or form, whether they remember our names or our team or anything like that, we would have been, a huge building block in the success of Hershey over a very long period of time. I think what COVID has done is, and we even said that when this thing was breaking and we were starting to, go to work from home, remember what we said our role was and think about the context of what we were saying. You know, we were kind of doing it tongue in cheek, kind of, you know, to again, motivate people and get them to like listen. But now it was literally manifestly true that if we do our jobs really, really well over the past, you know, 7 weeks, I would say 7 or 8 weeks, and then clearly at least through the end of the year, then we're setting ourselves up and our company up for continued success. So from that standpoint, I think that's motivating. It's also frankly exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 125 years, that's a long time, but I love that. Yeah. I love that as a mission statement. It actually makes me think when I went to Under Armour's campus in Baltimore for the first time, when you walk in, the first thing that it says is protect our house. Like that's the rallying cry of the company. Galvanizing your team around this mission. Let's have this thing last for another 125 years. I agree. That's inspirational.
Well, I think, you know, if we break it down a little bit more, it's really geared to like what fundamentally the Hershey company was built on. So Hershey was one of the first, if not the first, mission-driven, you know, purpose-driven companies. So our largest shareholder is the Milton Hershey Trust, and its sole mission is to support and educate disadvantaged children. Period. So everything that we do, everything that we sell, is going to benefit disadvantaged children, and we, you know, that's a big part of our culture. So, you know, that being able to, in one way, from a business perspective, create a foundation for the future success of the company. It's great for the company. I think everybody would feel proud about that, but it's probably you feel more proud because you know you're actually supporting a trust that literally in perpetuity is going to try to help the most disadvantaged, disenfranchised. So I think that's really cool. And I think the other thing too is you introduced me as from Hershey, Pennsylvania. So it's not just the Hershey Chocolate Company, or the Hershey Company rather. It's Hershey, PA. The entire town literally, you know, evolved and sprung from one man's vision. And so being successful in the here and now is utterly important to the communities in Hershey, to the community of Hershey, to the people that live in the community that work both for Hershey, but also are supporting the broader company through the business and services in the surrounding areas, whether they're farmers or service providers or whatever it might be. So we take those things really, really seriously. It's not just that we have a company to run and we want to run it in the best way possible. We have the trust that we need to support, and we have a town named after us that we have to support. And so that becomes a really heady mix in terms of taking your role seriously and driving the business forward in a really tough time.
No, there's so much mission in everything that you just said. I have one more question, because I know we're coming up here time. Of all the things that you've been doing at a leadership level to anchor your team in what's important, create new types of rituals, what would you say you've learned about the culture at Hershey that you want to make sure when we come back to work in whatever is, I'm putting air quotes, normal, that you want to continue as an organization?
So I think, you know, one of the benefits of COVID would be proving out to the organization that they can work in a different way. Because you're in Central PA, because it's an old company with a very proud heritage. There's certain ways we approach things and look at things and do things which are fantastic. I mean, there's a lot to love about Hershey, but sometimes it can be hard to maybe make a transition to it into looking at business in a new way or using new tools. COVID has completely, you know, obliterated that kind of, you know, I would say cultural wall. And so, you know, the adoption of the technologies and the remote ways of working has been overwhelmingly accepted. And a lot of people are like, why didn't we do this sooner? So there's a side benefit. The other thing I think is really interesting is that Hershey talks a lot about integrity, and they talk a lot about trust. So if you were to see, you know, a lot of the documents in and around the corporate mission and whatnot, you'd see those words and the way we, you know, leadership behaviors and the way we you know, talk to people about their performance and whatnot. Those words will come up a lot. And like with every organization, though, there's always points of friction where, can I trust this partner, or is there an agenda? And I would say in general, you know, Hershey doesn't really have huge problems in that area, which is fantastic. But at the same time, to the degree that we did, those have been obliterated as well. And they've really been obliterated because you just don't, in this kind of like environment, you do not have time to focus on who's right. You only have time really to focus on what's right. And so it's really been liberating. And actually in a lot of our leadership teams, we've talked about how we're actually thinking the team has become stronger, even though we're further apart than when we were in a building together. Because there's much more clarity of purpose, and you want to maximize that time and be exceptionally clear, where you don't have the fuzziness when you're in a physical environment. Oh, I can catch up to that person later. It's much more an intentional kind of, here's what we need to do, here's how we're going to do it, speak up or forever hold your peace, move on. And that's been inspiring.
I love that distinction. No more who's right, but what's right. I am going to take one question from the audience because you are actually the literal expert on this, and I want everyone to learn from you.
No, we'll see.
All right, so this is from the audience. Hershey, I saw in today's earnings that gum mints are struggling. How do you drive impulse behavior in a digital environment?
So the first thing is the gum mints behavior is a behavior that's not necessarily unique to digital. That behavior is because we have social distancing. So more so than the other brands and categories that we are in, chocolate, those are very emotionally involved products, whereas gum and mints are much more functional. And so, so when you don't have the need to brush your teeth as often or worry about having to be talking to a client and whatnot, your use of gum and mints is probably going to go down. So there's a core kind of like consistent overall behavior that's actually going with that call out from the earnings call. And the other thing in terms of impulse is, digital is a really different environment. So yeah, you're not going through a checkout. Yeah, that see candy, buy candy, eat candy behavior, which, is very important to our category, is not necessarily, highly effective right now. And a lot of people kind of default back to, well, what's that going to mean to digital? How do you mimic impulse in digital? And the true answer is digital behaviors are different from physical behaviors. So what you do is you leverage the goodness of the digital behaviors for maximum opportunity. And if you do that right, if you're smart, then you're going to more than mitigate some of the issues you might have on the impulse end. Not that you don't have impulse, you still have that, but you're just dealing with that problem in a slightly different way by saying, well, what's unique about the channel that gives me an advantage versus focusing on the thing that's an inherent disadvantage. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit.
Yeah, I just love it. We all have bad breath and we're not washing our hair. Well, thank you, Doug.
You're welcome, Rachel.
Appreciate it. Anda, who is next?
I started laughing, Doug, when you were talking about them. I don't know how I didn't add up that in my head, but yeah, you're right. I have not bought gum in a while. So next up we have Robin Matlock from VMware. Welcome, Robin.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, actually, when you first dialed in, you were in this beautiful garden, and it made me very jealous to know that you were in a much better weather than I am, but now you've been kinder to us and you moved indoors to not.
I think my laptop didn't like the sunshine as much as I did. I think it started having a little bit of an overheating problem.
Yeah. So Robin, you are the SVP and the CMO at VMware. It's a really big role. I think when I look at your background, I think, you've been in technology, you've been in enterprise software, you're an expert on all things B2B. So I would really love to hear your perspective on how that sector and that world is affected compared to some of the consumer products that we were just talking about. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then separately, as you're talking through that, I know events are just such a big lead source for all B2B companies. Mm-hmm. And I know you have a big event coming up, VMworld. So I'd love to hear how you've thought about, I guess, replacing that, moving that to digital, and just thinking through how you thoughtfully organize it to bring the same value to the company.
Sure. Well, let's start a little bit with the kind of higher level of the company before we get to marketing. Like all of us, our world is also turned upside down, both personally and professionally. VMware is a B2B enterprise software cloud services company, big deals. So you're talking, 7-digit deals and above, large enterprises, global 2000 kind of customers. All of a sudden who went from high level of personal engagement, complex selling, multiple engagements, month-long trials and proof of concepts. You can just imagine the complexity. And then all of a sudden everybody's working from home. So the nature of how we had to carry on, like everybody else, had to turn completely upside down. Our strategy and what we did, first of all, we're a tech company. So for the VMware employee base to work remotely like that, I mean, we do it all. We're already 24/7, 365 days a year. So that really wasn't an issue for us. That's very different in some sectors and some verticals. But for us, that literally was very, very comfortable. I should just qualify that. That's not true of all parts of the world. So we might want to come back to that because in some parts of the world, the work from home thing is a very, very real challenge. But anyway, we flipped on that side pretty quickly. But then it became, okay, how do our customers, what can we do to help them? What do they need from us? And their needs changed overnight. So I think the thing we had to do is to adapt very quickly to what can we do to help them. And there definitely were parts of our business that were very critical to them and other parts of our business that frankly weren't that interesting to them, and how we quickly had to flip that coin to make sure we were helping them in the ways we could, most effectively.
And on the enterprise sales side, because you just made this point around like how high touch that sales cycle is and how long it is, what do you think happens to enterprise sales as a result of this? Again, it's so event heavy and event dependent and in-person dependent. Are you seeing any trends? Do you have any predictions for all of us enterprise software company owners?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think any of us have a perfect crystal ball on this. And I think a lot kind of depends on what is the comeback motion. I think to the extent that we're talking about still complex decision-making with multiple stakeholders, face-to-face engagement isn't going to be completely replaced. It may take a while to get back to the scale that we had operated in, but when you're doing, 10, 50, 100, $200 million software transactions, you're going to want to be able to engage and talk with a variety of folks. There's a whole army of people that get involved in these complex deals. So I don't see that completely disappearing, but I can tell you right now, everybody is an inside salesperson, everybody. And I think for sellers that are used to big relationship kind of selling, it is a really tricky thing. And they're used to hospitality. They're used to going to the ball game, or they're used to having dinner with a customer and having a glass of wine. And all of a sudden now they have to build relationship and keep relationship in a much more, for them, a somewhat more sterile environment. So I can't tell you exactly where we're going to come out on the end. I do expect that there will be long-term shifts to how people drive, B2B enterprise selling. I don't think it's going to go completely to now remote engagement, but I suspect that it will shift. Even before this, though, we knew that our customers were doing roughly, 50, 60, 70% of their buying journey before they ever talked to somebody. So the digital demand and the need to engage customers very effectively digitally has been coming at us for a long period of time. I don't think that's a huge shock.
Well, I think if anything, this crisis has increased the importance of both marketing and product, right? Like in the absence of those relationships, those two areas of the company in a way, shine the most. You have to have value because otherwise these sales are just not going to happen in a world like this. But then as you mentioned, 60% of the buying journey happens before. So how have you mentioned content engagement as something that you look for, but how have you thought about shifting your dollars around? And again, really curious about the event side and VMworld in particular. How have you moved the money from event marketing to maybe virtual events, although I would assume that would be cheaper? And if so, where else have you deployed dollars to make up for it?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I would say the physical events was the hardest, you know, the thing that's had the most radical impact. We've always had digital, always on kind of marketing and digital campaigns, and digital's always been a big part of what we do. So you're right. The events piece is the part that all of a sudden needs complete rethinking. And first of all, we are being, you know, we're very forward looking, but at the same time, you don't want to overcorrect, you know, a year ahead of yourself if this, you know, situation changes. So we're trying to be very smart about, okay, let's make decisions through Q2. Let's make decisions now in Q3. And we have been kind of chunking that out in chapters. We immediately, you know, just stopped all face-to-face events, and we did a couple of things. We either flipped them to digital right away if they were conducive to that. We postponed them if it was really just the type of intimacy that you needed, a face-to-face engagement. It was better to just delay. We rescheduled them. Or we're now looking later in the year at potential hybrids, where maybe in small gatherings we'll have some physical and it will be augmented with digital at scale. So it's been more than VMworld, by the way. We do hundreds and hundreds of events around the world. So we've had to really take a very individual look at kind of what was the purpose of the event, who was the target audience, but no physical engagement is happening in Q2, and we've now started to bleed into Q3. On VMworld, we've publicly announced. So VMworld is a user conference, essentially, 25,000 strong in the US, typically in San Francisco, and then it happens again in Barcelona, about 15,000. Then it rolls all through Asia and hits about another 30, 35,000, all face-to-face. So big conferences, I think, are an interesting topic, but what we've gone is for this year, we've said, hey, it's a digital year for this year. Don't suspect that's the forever, but we've gone high scale digital for the VMworld content, and then we're doing some executive stuff later in the year that we'll do with kind of more high touch engagement stuff.
So Robin, I'm assuming you have a pretty big part of your team globally and then some of your team in the US. I'm curious what the split is. And I'm also curious, how have you thought about managing team morale when this crisis has hit us so differently in different regions of the world?
Yeah, so we're very distributed in that sense. I mean, a global, VMware is like 31,000 plus employees. We're all over the world. And I think that's something that's really important is this pandemic and the consequence of working and being in shelter in place is handled very differently around the world. We have a big employees in India. They don't have private work areas in their homes. They share their homes with multiple. They could have grandparents, they could have in-laws, they could have, extended family members. And I mean, we literally have stories of some of our engineers having to carve out, like in their bathroom, put curtains up so they could talk to customers, because they're actually helping customers solve, like building a remote workforce overnight. I mean, really critical technical things. And they just don't have that kind of space. I think one thing is we have to be very empathetic that not all cultures are the same. And this work from home thing is very different depending on where you live. We've been, I think VMware's, just like, Doug was talking about from Hershey, we have a great brand internally within our employee base. We care about our people deeply, and we first and foremost put their needs first. We sent messages out right from the beginning. You got to take care of yourself, take care of your family, be safe. We're probably through that by now. We've been at this now for several weeks. But we're definitely communicating a lot. I mean, I'm kind of mirroring much of what has been said. We're communicating a lot. We're shifting. We got to think about where is the work to be done. And I look at it as like an all hands on deck kind of mentality, and really encouraging teams to raise their hand. If you're in the physical events team and you're kind of on hold right now, how can you go help your digital partners, because they're overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do. So we've done a lot of that, kind of just rejiggering kind of virtual teams to get the resources retooled and put into the right directions.
Robin, last question for you. I'm curious what your prediction is around events in general after COVID. Do you think anything big changes for us? Do we go back to those huge conferences in Vegas and Barcelona and San Francisco, or do you think we're going to be a little bit more conservative about it?
Well, certainly I have no better insight than the next guy, but my point of view is My personal view is yes, we will. Will it happen overnight? No. Will some people potentially lose the appetite that forever for the rest of their lives? Maybe. But I think most people, we are a people of networking and tribe, right? We like our people, we like connectivity, we like human interaction. I think safety precautions could change, that we might see new ways of handling, this bacteria spacing, those kinds of things. But I personally don't think, I don't think football is going to go and die. The demand to go watch a live football game is not going to disappear. And as long as we're going to big sporting events, we're probably going to be able to justify going to big business events.
That's true. Well, I think we're probably all going to be carrying COVID passports soon. So
that's the possibility, or our little bacteria sprays and our nets and, all kinds of things. But we'll adapt. We're an adaptable species.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, Robin. Really appreciate that. So I wanted to move on to our next speaker. Next up, we have Barbara. Barbara, welcome. You've already shared a couple of thoughts with us. Welcome back.
Hi, Anda. Thanks so much.
So Barbara, I want to kick it off by asking you a little bit about that marketing and comms balance and intersection. I know that you run both of those functions as well. And when we were talking, you mentioned also the balance that you have to play between the messages that are sent in the US versus globally, because John Hancock is obviously part of a much larger company. So tell us a little bit about how that has shifted or influenced the reaction to the crisis.
So, I think in some ways the crisis has enabled the two to work even better together. And I think, others commented on this. Laura started that conversation. But, if even with our paid media, right, even if there's an adjustment, there was a lag in bringing that, back and figuring out the right ways to bring that back. The brand team was very eager to partner with comms and find the right way to bring messages to the community, to look to align with our customers, but get that earned media opportunity. And so I think sometimes the best thing to bring teams together is an idea that everyone loves and everyone can stand behind. So we had this idea that we put into market, and this is also like our biggest event is sponsoring the Boston Marathon. And that's actually the most dollars I spend on, I'm thinking for a second, but pretty much just about anything. And so with that being postponed, the team was eager to do something to still acknowledge the day that usually happens on, and acknowledge even the whole time of year. So this idea that brought comms and marketing together was all around gratitude and gratitude for the front lines, but really lighting the city blue and very quickly leveraging the relationships we had and the power of comms. We got the mayor of Boston, the governor of Massachusetts, as well as the Boston Athletic Association that owns the marathon together to light the city blue. And, we got all of tons of Boston and then other places as well to do this. And we also had like things online where people could download and color and put that in your windows, because again, I think people are seeking that camaraderie and that connection to wanting to not only cheer on the front lines, which was extremely important, but to kind of acknowledge that this is a time of year that Boston usually comes together for such a big event. So I think, that's just one example, but, and maybe it goes faster with the crisis, but I think what the brand and the comms team largely have found is that they need each other, they do better together, and therefore they, are more likely to invite each other in, to the next round. So I think that's been working well. The other question you asked was around global, and for us it's interesting, we have a different brand than the global brand. So we're owned by a Canadian company called Manulife. So sometimes it really feels like we're defining John Hancock initiatives, we're looking to do things with the John Hancock community and employees, and that feels kind of different from global. But we have worked hard, especially in the crisis, to be aligned, to have one, source of the truth and from our messaging. And so that, that's been true of COVID. Every single thing that we do for COVID has a central reviewer on my team and then a central reviewer globally. And they work together because, we don't want it, certainly it would make sense all over the place. And so while in Boston, quickly John Hancock had given $1 million to the Boston Resilience Fund. Globally, they had set out to do something, and it was all around, feeding people, which of course was a needed action, and it was something that we could connect to as well. So during the days of our gratitude campaign, actually between what was One Boston Day, which is the anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombings, and the day that the marathon would have happened, which is a 5-day period, we did something called off the plate, and we were feeding people, feeding the front lines, feeding the hospital workers. And so I think the example I bring up is to say that sometimes what we end up doing is not exactly what global is thinking about, or we're not always in sync with timing. But I think because the timing was so compressed here, and because the messaging strategy and approvals were so tightly, coordinated, in this case, we had done something, but we were very quick to be able to line up to what global was doing as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember when we talked, you mentioned a couple of things that I really wanted to showcase. First, you said that from the get-go, you've been employee first and customer second. And I thought that was a really great point. Curious as to how you've demonstrated that in your actions, in particular as it pertains to making sure that the team's mental health and overall kind of anxiety levels are manageable. And then kind of curious the answer to that in conjunction with something else that you said on the call, which is that everyone kind of felt that you really can't mess this up. Like there's not a lot of room for failure here, especially when you're talking about life insurance and trying to get that to people, right? So how are you dealing with that? How are you making it okay for people to fail and not put tremendous pressure on them when it's really not okay for people to fail during this time, especially given what you do?
So I feel like you've been in our hallways, and I know we had the opportunity to talk, but very quickly, the reason why we were employee first and the reason why that became the most important thing is if our employee base was not equipped to work from home, and I don't mean the technology, I mean, what are you doing about your kids? Do you feel okay about your health and safety? Do you know who to call if you don't feel okay about your health and safety? And so making sure that all those things were communicated. And so the specific actions, as you said, became a cascading series of meetings. And so in those meetings where there would be a broadcast and there would be updates, and there would be also a chance to ask questions. And so from the most senior executive team, they would have a meeting. To the things that our management did locally, which were 3 touches a week, like a written communication, an HR Ask Anything meeting, and then an open town hall on at the end of the week on Fridays. And we did this so that employees all the time could ask questions, could get their questions answered, especially on the Ask Anything HR calls. Every week, there are like 2,000 people that dial in, and people ask questions, not all of which have answers to right now, but there is a forum to ask. People are concerned when they go back to work, what is the setup going to be? Are we still going to be in an agile setup? How will that work? How will we determine who can go back to work? So I think the focus on employees with the combination of meetings, messages became clear. And while initially it was all about COVID, and that continues to have a place, we have shifted it. So now we're talking about the business, and we're talking about the things that are getting done. What's our position with customers, what are we selling more of, less of, whatever the messages are. But I think by initially getting that foundation and that trust with employees that we were looking out for their health and safety, and then continuing the same pattern of communications, we were able to then, when it made sense, bring other topics to bear. So I think that's how that has gone. We do a survey also after most big meetings, and so we get a lot of feedback. We hear what's working and what's not, and an action that you have to take is you have to listen to the feedback. And so a lot of things have been adjusted based on that feedback. In terms of the other part of your question, which is, what do you do in a situation where people feel like they can't fail? No one wants to fail their customers. No one, wants to be in a situation. We have death claims coming in. We have death claims coming in, obviously, because of COVID. And those are, family members that can't be together with their loved ones to mourn people in their family that are passing away. And so it takes a tremendous amount of empathy. And I think when we think about not failing, is you don't want to fail those people who are calling. And in general, I think in a company, you have to have a culture where it's okay to try different things, and it's okay to try different ideas, go to market with different things, different even different things for employees, and you change, and you it's okay in those settings to fail. I think it's our frontline workers that feel the most pressure to be able to help those customers. And so in a sense, it's no one's punishing them, no one's getting in trouble, of course everyone is automatically trying their best. But it's just about that empathy and that feeling of wanting to do right by the customers.
That makes sense. Well, the flip side of that is you have just so much purpose in what you do if you're working in those areas, and so I'm happy to hear that is true for the teams across the board. Barbara, thank you so much for sharing your views. Hopefully you stay on for a few more questions for the audience, because you have a few that are directed at you. And we're going to ask a few after our next guest. So next up, I want to, thank you again. Next up, I want to welcome Rich. There was a little bit of back and forth as to whether your audio is working, so let's check that first. Welcome, Rich.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
There we go.
Right.
Okay.
Amazing.
So I saw your face light up when we showed the results of the survey that we did before, the poll, because you are the global head of content for BlackRock. And so increased content consumption is music to your ears. Content leaders also happen to be my favorite people. And so I'm very happy to be talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining.
It's great to be here. And I just, I felt I didn't take part in that poll, but obviously
you would have skewed it.
I know. I increased my Netflix consumption over the past 6 weeks, so I completely identified with the 49%.
Well, I'm sure everyone was referring to BlackRock content when they were speaking to that. So, yeah, of course. So I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, how have you seen the role of content evolve since the crisis? Have you seen it increase in importance, decrease in importance, same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak for, from the perspective of a content leader at, a financial services firm from sort of our master brand level, where we're not really out there selling product. We're not hawking product. We're more about, top of funnel thought leadership that sort of positions our insights for the on markets, for social audiences. What I see, both from us and from, the competitor set is just, frankly, the type of content that you would expect to come out of financial services firms at this time. It's sort of our bread and butter. It's sort of, this is sort of, when there are financial crises, this is when you can put the smart insights that these places have out to the public. So I've seen a lot of uptick on that from other banks and from other financial institutions, certainly landing in my social feeds, but I'm probably their target audience, so that's why. And at BlackRock, it really, the timing was was something, because we, you know, if this had happened even 4 or 5 months ago, we would not have had the capacity for part of this in-house production newsroom that we built to actually output this content. So we've been able to keep up. I think we've surprised ourselves in our ability to do so. But I think, you know, to answer your question, I think an increase in content around market volatility and what it means for consumers, investors, the public is what I've seen and what I'm looking at the most. That and, you know, the Tiger Show on Netflix.
The Tiger Show. I swear to God, everyone was telling me you have to start watching it. And so I did, but it just made me more sad and more depressed about the current time. So, so I stopped. I'm rewatching Marvelous Mrs. Maisel because it makes me happy. It's such a great TV show. Anyway, as you were just talking about your internal content studio, I'm curious, what are some of the lessons you've learned about agility in terms of content production since the crisis? I'm assuming you've all had to go, obviously, work remotely. How are you making videos? How are you creating content during this time?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is, we had the capability in-house even 4 months ago, because this is a new build for Masterbrand at BlackRock to be able to have this in-house production capability that churns out content relating to our thought leadership from around the firm, and content connected to our reputation and sort of the impact we have on society, as well as content around sort of the people of BlackRock, more for Instagram. So we, again, when I said earlier, we surprised ourselves, we truly did. We are working remotely. We have, you know, 2 producers on the team who are working remotely with the businesses, in touch, finding out, you know, story hunting. And then we've got, you know, 1.5, 2 editors who are working remotely as well. And even that comes in a regulated industry with its own set of challenges, just because of firewalls and because of you know, what you could take out of the building and everything. But we were able to work to get home studios done for these editors, so that we were able to stay agile and actually produce more content than we would have produced otherwise had this not happened.
And you were talking a bit about, just mentioned compliance, and I know we talked a bit about this. Compliance, when people hear this word, they're like, oh God, compliance, it's going to delay everything. How does it work for BlackRock? And also, how has the crisis changed approval for content?
You know, it's funny, I was talking to someone earlier today. I think back in January, Larry Fink, our CEO, sent this letter out, you know, sort of declaring, putting a foot in the sand about sustainability, right? A stake in the ground on sustainability is sort of our standard for investing going forward, sustainable investing. And that was a huge effort internally to you know, get that amplification off the ground from a variety of teams around BlackRock. And someone was saying earlier today, that sort of was a great forcing mechanism for us to work together. And without realizing it at the time, late last year and early January, I think really prepped us well for what we're dealing with now. And compliance was part of that. So to build an in-house production capability at a place like BlackRock, which hadn't really done it at this level before, you know, took a close partnership with compliance to let them know the type of content we wanted to put out, what the timeline would be, and then work together for the system, on a system to make that happen faster and more in real time. And we got to a place, by the time we piloted our initial video series, we got to a place where we were able to work with them to agree what could be released in which markets. And then our sustainability announcement back in January was a very complicated rollout, different languages, different, you know, dealing with different regulators in different countries of what you could say, what you can't say, different, you know, the amount of disclosures. I've never seen so much disclosure language in different languages. we were able to take that forth, and it really has not been an issue. I mean, we sort of had that system. It became a really well-oiled system, so that by the time we all left the office and are all working from home, it's just built in. We actually don't give it a second thought. They are truly, truly great partners and important partners.
So, Rich, we have a question here for you, and it's actually talking about the announcement around sustainability, but it's also making a point that I think is really interesting, and I'd love for you to answer. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
Sure.
There's an implication that brand marketing dollars compete for dollars that go to revenue generating businesses. And I think in particular content, because I talk to so many content leaders, I see them oftentimes struggling to advocate for the importance of it. How have you thought about it? You know, obviously since the crisis, I think we've all seen increase in the production of content leaders just being on the front lines of this in many ways. But how are you thinking about ROI now versus a few months ago? Is that going to change also after the crisis or not?
So again, speaking from, BlackRock's a very big place with a lot of businesses, but, speaking strictly from the corporate brand level, and the content team functions under global marketing, we don't, it's true, we don't have a big budget, relatively speaking, although at the same time, I can't complain. We have enough budget to get out the stuff that we are able to produce now, with a little paid behind it as well, which is a bonus, so we can make sure that we're getting our videos and podcasts into the feeds of people we think would be most receptive to them. So it's clear that we are not going to drive sales from month to month because of a video that we put out. And that is actually not the object of a video. We're in this sort of for, longer term play, so that BlackRock can come to be known in the marketplace as a place where you can get, for example, smart insights around markets and the economy over time, as many of our competitors are doing. So our KPI, I don't think is going to change much from that perspective coming out of this. I think it's still going to be, general, you're looking for favorability, trust. Our reputation is very important, and really, we have buy-in from the top, from top leadership about, I think, global marketing in general, realizing that the assets we produce, be it in support of brand, be it in support of content, are ultimately an expression of the firm's purpose, which is to help more and more people experience financial well-being. And that is the game. And we're certainly not feeling any sort of pressure for short-termism, so to speak, where the assets we're producing, videos, podcasts, will look to 3 months from now and hopefully lead to a spike in sales. It's a much longer term play, and that has not changed as of yet.
I like that. I think content for high consideration categories and products, content is really the performance marketing of these categories. So Rich, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think Rachel wants to take one more speaker, our final speaker, and then open up for Q&A to everyone. We have a bunch of questions coming in. So Rachel, over to you.
Yes, and Rich, if you work with Frank Cooper and Alex Chung, I started my career with both of them.
Awesome.
So, great people.
Just happened to be in touch with both of them today. Remotely, of course.
Send them my love. So, so excited to bring up our next speaker. Essie, are you in the house?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
So Essie Eggleston, she is the EVP and COO of Unilever's beauty and personal care business. I can only imagine how insane your life has been the last few weeks, and reading, all the news that's coming out every single day. I think I read a Guardian article this morning where Alan, your CEO, said consumer shopping has fundamentally changed. We're all behind e-commerce. We don't see that ending. But obviously there's so many brands within Unilever across such diverse product categories. You representing beauty and personal care, where, at least from my perspective, there has been a shift in that overall category during this time. So I'm curious, how has your role changed from a day-to-day aspect, from an operating aspect over the last 7 weeks?
Like for everyone, we've never been in more dynamic times. So in the beauty and personal care business, it's shifted, right? We see hygiene as more important than ever before. And consumers have different things on their minds. And shopping, just as you heard Alan say, has really changed. So my role is more helping the team understand the changes and pivoting and shifting our plans into the changes. One thing that hasn't changed, that's been an always commitment, is to be of service. You know, Unilever is so focused, I am so focused on being of service to people, to shoppers and consumers, and to our retailers. So through that service, the big thing we're doing is keeping up with how all of those areas are changing. And so then we stay really connected to figure out how to change our plans. And that's the part that is so intense, right? Being a long lead time planning business, changing on a dime based on the now and not really knowing where the future is headed.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, you know, we work with a bunch of your brands, and one of the things that I was like, how in the world did you turn this around so fast, was the Dove campaign. And so from like an operational standpoint, how are you getting the team to move this quickly?
It's a lot, but the good thing is the company's culture is one of being connected. So really it's using those connections and creating clarity of mission, and that's changing. So I started with first the consumers and the shoppers, like what's on people's mind. People are scared is what they are. Not just scared of the disease, but of course scared of the disease, but scared about the future because of the economic recession. You know, people are at home, we all know that, and they're mad that their lives have been changed. And some are lonely and isolated. So you were talking about the Dove campaign, you know, but people are also grateful for the medical frontliners. I've heard some, you know, number of people have talked about that. And so in connecting with the Dove team and being very, very engaged with them, you know, what can we do to make a difference? And we just got together like never before. I meet with my team daily. We have daily stand-ups. I used to meet with my team, this same team, the frequency was probably every 2 weeks. So now we're meeting daily. And the expanded sense of team, I run a local team and I have global colleagues. My daily meetings are local and global together. And so it allows us to pivot and do things much quicker, like the Courage is Beautiful effort that normally would have taken several months to get done, that we were able to do that in less than a week's time.
No, it's remarkable. How do you even pick a time to do a global local call? It's like, what time?
Well, you don't pick a time, you wedge it in.
Yeah.
You know, these days. So we have 8:30 stand-ups.
Wow.
And with my global team, I have a 7:30 stand-up. And then we started them, actually, I said I meet daily, but we're starting to moderate them and do them more like 3 times a week. So they're not so many. But in the early days, the connections are so important because you are pivoting strategy. And you have so many people, and not just are you pivoting strategy based on people being scared, people staying at home, people wanting to protect themselves, and then eat everything. You know, not just e-commerce, and that's what Alan was talking about, of course, but eat everything. The way we work, the way we engage with consumers and people, everything is contactless. So with those changes, we have to stay connected. And they're in strategy, but they're also in execution. And so I always use frameworks: now, near, and next. We're still in the now and the near, and then trying to ease out on the next through scenario planning. Because none of us can predict what's going to come out of this. And we've seen the range of economic scenarios, right? That we could have a deep recession that ends this year, or worse, that's best case, or so deep that it extends and won't end until 2023. So we've got to, in the next horizon, work on scenarios if that's the case, right? So the short answer is staying frequently connected.
And does everyone within your organization know the next plans? Like, in terms of transparency, would the brand manager know the different scenarios for next? Like, I'm curious how far your message goes.
Yeah, so in terms of transparency, that's in all layers on the now, near, and next. And transparency, I said connectivity is the most important. The next piece I would say is agility, which is the change. And then the third I would say is a transparency. And the way I manage the transparency is less in the scenarios for the future, because you have more of the organization needs to focus on the now and the near over the next. So I mentioned how I meet with my direct team daily, moving to 3 times a week. With my extended team, the 500 people in the beauty and personal care business, we meet weekly and do a town hall. And in that, to your point on transparency, we make sure the whole organization is clear on kind of the new reality. And in that, not just for our business, what's happening in the world in terms of the disease and the what's happening now in terms of a third of Americans not being able to pay bills, but importantly, in that hour time, we leave 30 minutes for people to ask questions and anonymously, right? So we use Pigeonhole, and we just spend the time having questions, and we get all kinds of questions. You know, are our jobs safe, things like that. So that's where we create the transparency. And you ask how many people know about the scenarios. In the future, I tend to keep that. I let the broader 500 team know that we're working on scenarios, but I might have 20 people involved in that scenario planning. Because, you know, the other thing, we've got to be so mindful of people's capacity these days, physical, mental, and emotional, because we're all in such different places. We have people personally sick, or people in our lives that are sick or passing away. So we can't overwhelm them with too much. So in the transparency around the future, I try not to give too many people in the organization that.
Got it. At an individual level, for employees, is job security what you believe is most important to them right now?
That's probably the top 3. I would not say the most important is their safety. That's what people are most concerned about. The second thing I think is flexibility. We have a lot of the workforce that are parents, and so they're homeschooling kids, and you know that's challenging. Again, just flexibility is important. And then I would say third certainly is job security. And you heard that Alan really committed to at least for the next 3 months, you know, job security for our employees. And we've made a broader commitment that our intention, as we think about taking care of people and employees and keeping our business healthy, that you know, our goal would be to protect employees. So that is among the top.
In terms of parents at Unilever and flexibility, you know, you mentioned like you're doing global local calls. So how are you managing that flexibility when there's probably so many demands in people's time right now?
Yeah, it's really just being kind and being human and realizing, you know, people are all in different situations. So I'm doing it a number of ways. One is on an individual level, and then one is on a group organization level. I'm assuming that I have 30% less organization capacity, and I'm creating my project load as we do pivots based on that reduced capacity. And as again, we have daily meetings now, so we're coming together across what in the past could have been silos to talk about those priorities and where we shift and pivot resources. So projects that are lower priority are on hold now, how we pivot into new places. So that helps with capacity and flexibility in projects. Now, on an individual level, we're just being kind and human, and just knowing some people, we know the rhythms in some cases of when people have class work and when they need to help and when they don't, and we flex in for that colleague. But it is challenging because the workday seems fluid, right? The weekends and the weekdays all flow together, but we know we all need gaps during our day, if it's to go out for a walk or if it's to do childcare. So we're managing it, and I'm managing it in 2 different ways.
I made turkey burgers at 2 p.m. yesterday. That was new for me.
You have to. And you know, my son's at home, my kids, I have a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they're at home in homeschool, and there's times, you know, I have to cook lunch for my son. I mean, so we're all doing it. And we're used to it. I mean, that's the lemonade side of the lemons. Like, we're more connected than ever before. We know each other's kids now in a way that we haven't before, and the spouses, and we do happy hours with families. And, you know, it's nice in some ways because we get to see the lovely plant in your apartment and the photos and the pictures that I normally wouldn't have a chance to see.
Well, thank you, Essie. I mean, I just learned a lot about leadership, and just that metric of 30% less capacity. You know, it's hard for me to swallow at an operating level, but you're absolutely right. And I think we probably all need to model our business around that. So I know we want to take some questions from the group. Anda, did you pick a favorite?
Well, I have a few that I want to ask specifically to each of the speakers just now, but I want to start with one that's a little bit higher level. What do you think consumers will expect from brands and brand leaders in the foreseeable future? And I want to augment this with my own twist to it. Do you think consumers genuinely want to hear about what these companies, all of your companies, are doing to help consumers? Or do you think they just want to be inspired by you? They want to be distracted by you? Or do they just want content and products that can help them, and that's it?
I think what companies do for the world matters, and matters to people. And not just I think that, our data shows that. So I think it's more important than ever before because there's more need. So when I'm on my my weekly town halls, half the questions are asking what more we can do. We've given $20 million behind a program called United for America, where we're donating to Feeding America and Direct Relief. You've got $1 million fund for women of color entrepreneurs. We're doing a lot, and my employees are still asking what more can we do? And that's because not just that they care about it, people care about it, right? People very much want to know what our companies and our brands are doing to help during their time of need.
You know, I see the only pushback I'd have is that everyone came out, every brand came out and said, here's what we're doing. And it almost got a little bit too noisy. And I don't know if we all got like desensitized to it. And then the government's putting all this money into the market, and I don't know, it feels like there's a lot, it almost has become noise. And so it's hard to separate what and contextualize what $10 million means versus 50 versus 1, and what the right causes are. It feels like everywhere there's causes. So yeah, it's been hard for me to wrap my mind around that. As a consumer, I love everything that comes out of Dove. I don't know how you guys do it every single time. But I love seeing brands try to entertain us. I genuinely think that we're like so many weeks into this, like we kind of just want to take our mind off of it. And so the more I see brands do that, the more I'm like, yeah, you go Unilever, or you go Hancock.
You know, not that I'm trying to turn this into a debate, but I do think that all of us
do it.
No, but all of us as business leaders, when Essie talks about her operating model, like, to be honest, I did the same thing. I did disaster planning for my business, but when I did it, I also included like how we can give back, right? So, you know, MikMak made a donation to 3 different organizations because I knew it would matter to my team, it matters to me, and it matters to all the people that we work with in terms of community. So I do believe that there's a level of fiscal responsibility, especially from large corporations, that employees and consumers expect. Regardless.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 things I think in your perspective that might be blending, that if you separate can help. There's what you do, and then it's what you say. And I think it is our responsibility to do more. And then we have to figure out what we say about what we do. And what you're seeing that I think is we're creating fatigue is we're all saying the same things about what we're doing. And we've got to not just do something so we can say something. We have to do something because it's consistent with what we believe, the brand's values, importantly, and the company's values. And then you have to figure out how to talk about it in a way that's authentic and consistent with the brand values and what you've demonstrated before. So why you're getting the malaise is because many of us are talking about celebrating medical frontline workers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge need there. So I stand, we can't stop because people are tired of hearing about it. And I would say many who are being affected and impacted are not, because they want the help. There's more need. So we all need to, so enough of my perspective. I don't mean to dominate the comment, but
No, it's
I think
great.
it's a good question, and I would separate the do from the say. And the say really needs to be authentic so it can be differentiated and shouldn't be the driver of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Mic drop.
There's a YouTube mashup video out there circulating about, you know, collating all the brand commercials out right now that have all the same language, same music, same narration, same tone, and it just, you know, takes you through. I don't know if you've seen it, but that, you know,
I have. It's quite interesting.
That came to mind. I think at the end of the day, you know, Edelman Trust Barometer on the pandemic that came out maybe 3 weeks ago, like their top stat was, you know, 80% of people expect brands in this time to do the right thing. And what that right thing was to do right by their employees. And you know, that was actually one of the top things. And in addition to, you know, what you were saying, Anda, about, you know, just wanting to be entertained, you know, you just want it to be authentic to the brand. So I don't think BlackRock could ever go out right now and try to entertain people. All of a sudden it'd be coming from nowhere. It'd be random, and we, you know, get criticized for it, and rightly so. But if it is a brand that's been sort of doing it for a long time, and that's sort of like in their ethos, and then I think that could be more palatable. But, you know, we all want to be entertained. The question is, should it be from brands at this time?
Yeah, and when I say entertain, I also mean stories of inspiration and hope.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of stories that are coming out of the financial world about how people and companies are trying to survive this. And that matters to me. I mean, of course, everything matters. It matters for me to hear that companies are actually doing things to help the world right now. The companies, government, investors, everyone. But I also want to hear that there's people who are, you know, surviving this, and they're fighting through this. And so, yeah, those are the stories that I find entertaining. Maybe that's not the right one.
So human success stories, but humans,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Beyond the numbers of this company donated X amount versus, and like 1 million versus 10 million actually does blend, right? At this point.
Right, exactly.
I absolutely agree. There's a celebration of the human spirit that we have not yet seen, and we are incredibly resilient. And I think there's a lot of storytelling in that, and frankly, I've seen some ideas from my team in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think what Rich mentioned is right. It has to be authentic, and I believe beyond just storytelling. Right. So part of it is storytelling for inspiration, but it has to tie into a brand truth.
Yeah.
Tie into some role your product plays, or some commitment that you have, not just for the sake, so that it can come from a brand. As Rich was saying, I completely agree with his point.
So I wanted to throw one final question to everyone, because this is very much in the theme of what we were hoping to also touch upon today, around just mental health and keeping our team sane. A question from Marissa: do you think baking in breaks at a systems level is better than on an individual level? Does that make sense? So like mandated breaks.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about it on our team, because I in the beginning, people weren't taking breaks, and I thought it was a problem, and people weren't exercising, and people were complaining they weren't eating right. Like all the symptoms were right there. And we thought, like, what could we put on the calendar? What could we block, so that we would protect people's time to take those breaks? And so while doing too much felt like, because people had meetings at different times, was difficult, what we at least started with and really try to hold by is nothing over lunch. So from 12 to 1, nothing. And I have a rule with my team that, like, there's no emails at night, and, you know, unless there's like, you know, a financial emergency and for marketing and someone needs us. we can be reached, but people should be shutting down, and so giving people their evenings back. And so I don't know that we've gone all the way there, but we've done that. We also have someone on our team that's taught an exercise class in the morning, and so people can opt into that type of break, and then it becomes like blocked on your calendar. But I think in general, it's a very good idea.
Thank you. I agree, by the way. We decided to do a mandatory break. We decided to do it after lunch because we thought we can't tell people, oh, we're actually giving you your lunchtime back. You were always supposed to have lunch. And so we wanted to try to do something on top of that. The difficulty is that we also have teams that are distributed in a different time zone. So we said, look, this is like the mandatory break, but if you need to take another hour, that's totally fine. I will say, like, I work all the time, and I think, I kind of pitied the leadership team for having to fend off all my Slacks and emails at any hours of the weekend and the day. But I so appreciate having just no notifications pop up on my phone between 1 and 2 p.m. It's so nice. And I can actually, focus on doing the work that I want, or go for a run or whatever. And so even with myself, I've kind of been grateful for the fact that this is happening, and I've taken it more seriously as a result. What about you, Rich? Essie, any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure the mandated break would work at a place like ours, just for a variety of reasons. I think it's a really good idea. I think what is important and incumbent upon us as leaders, though, is to model sort of appropriate behavior, especially in times like this. So recognize that, this is it goes back to empathy. I think particularly for analysts and associates, I think recognizing, putting yourselves in their shoes, this is the first real crisis they've been through in their working lives, which you forget. I've been through, I did 2008, stuff before then as a journalist, and recognizing the importance that we actually are working harder in this setup, and our commutes have gone, but that time with the commute has been taken up by phone calls, and now the days are starting earlier and they're ending later. So I'm trying to mandate that, we're being encouraged to take 2 extra days off in April and May, and I'm just really trying to force that on the team. But more importantly, model it and actually do it myself. And when I'm off for a day, I say I'm off, always reachable, but will not be coming onto calls, which, I know that the company will be fine if I don't join a call on a day when we're supposed to be off. And then I think that gives permission to the team to be able to feel like they could do it as well. So it's win-win. Yeah,
it's a good idea.
You have to model the behavior. It has to come from the top.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, I know we're over time, and I imagine everyone has places to be, wine to drink, because at least it's 6:07 in New York. So another amazing conversation. Thank you to all of our speakers. I learned a tremendous amount and actually took a lot of notes this session. I think some of the things that we heard, Anda, that's been consistent with some of the weeks, we as corporate America and as business leaders have been talking about digital transformation forever. The reality is COVID-19 was the thing that transformed our companies. From the way that we communicate internally, how we're going to market, whether you're in B2B or you're in B2C, this is absolutely going to be the defining moment where customer behavior has changed. I think what we continue to hear at a leadership level is that it is so important for us as leaders to over communicate right now. Repetition, figuring out ways to touch base with our teams at a macro and a micro level to really ensure that they feel connected. I think the thing that was really interesting this week, Anda, versus other weeks that really stood out to me is how mission-driven companies need to be right now, and to actually ensure that that ladders up to the greater brand promise. Because that's what's going to galvanize their teams. And in terms of like what's most important to teams right now, I think we heard it from everyone, is that they want to feel like their work matters right now and that they have job security. And there were a lot of great mic drop moments. but I think a few things that stood out to me was this idea of what you say and what you do. And, you know, another person also said, that was Etsy's words, but another speaker prior talked about how COVID has kind of cut out the corporate BS. It's really about what you do now that really, really matters. So I want to thank everyone. There were so many learnings. You can find us here next Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. EST time. And Anda, did I leave anything out?
No, I think one thing that stood out to me was just this question I wrote down. What's the most important thing you could do? I love that example from Vinu, who was sharing how in his FedEx days on Christmas, everyone just went to the shipping dock, or I think, and everyone was basically doing the thing that was most important for the company. I think we all have moments like that happening a lot during these days. And so this idea of like, regardless of what your job is, just do what is most important for the company right now. I like that as a galvanizing force for the team. So that was the only other thing I had. But this was a great conversation. Thank you guys so much for coming on, donating your time to the community. I know everyone appreciates it. And yeah, we'll see you here next week. Thank you all.
Everyone, have a
Stay
good
safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.